All right, Mark Violet here, Mark Violet PA, closing attorney, title company, awesome guy to work with, and I hope you're getting a lot of value. I know I am talking through this with you. All right, so Section 5 has to deal with the exclusion, extension of the closing date. So bring
Yes.
me into here.
So these are what I call where one party has the automatic right to an extension without having to necessarily ask the other party. The first one we deal with is in the event that the buyer is getting financing and has complied with all the terms of the financing. So remember, if a buyer failed to meet a deadline on financing, then all the financing terms and contingencies are removed from the contract as if it never existed, including this paragraph right here. So make sure your buyer is abiding by the time frames.
Mhm.
And this one's going to talk about in the event closing funds from buyer's lender are not available on closing date due to, we call it CFPB. Now, what happened was TRID changed the rules, requiring lenders to give a buyer a closing disclosure a minimum of 3 days prior to closing. And sometimes they can't meet that deadline.
Yeah.
Now, what I've seen in the field is some people think that if a lender is not prepared to close for any reason whatsoever, they automatically get up to a 7-day extension. That's not true. This is only for certain things where the lender cannot disclose the CD. So if the lender says, oh, our appraiser's running late, that may not qualify under this. So usually what happens is on the settlement statement or the CD, certain fees have to be in there, has to be disclosed to the buyer. Maybe something has changed. The parties did an addendum, sales price changed, and now doc stamps are higher, and the lender has to redisclose to a buyer. That's kind of where this comes into play.
Yeah.
If paragraph 8B is check, loan approval has been obtained and lender's underwriting is complete, then closing date shall be extended for such period to satisfy not to exceed 7 days. And again, be aware of the contract version you have. One version is calendar days. One version is business days. So obviously, if there's 7 days, that's going to include a business day somewhere along the way. So 7 on a calendar may not be 7 if you're dealing with business days.
There you go. Now, force majeure. What does that mean?
I have no idea. No, I'm joking. So it's a French term for something happens that the parties would have never contemplated stopping the completion of this contract. So the easiest one in our area are hurricanes.
Yeah.
At the time they signed the contract in, let's just say August 1st, it was bright and sunny out, 97 degrees, 100% humidity, a normal summer day in Florida. 2 weeks before closing, here comes the hurricane, knocks the whole house down, or substantially damages the house, something like that. Roads are closed, nobody can get to closing. So it's something that occurs completely out of the control of the parties, where it forces where one party can't perform or basically doesn't want to perform. And I think they have, including unavailability of utilities or issuance of hazard, wind, flood. Now, if there's a hurricane in the grid, that'll be covered somewhere else.
And on page 10, the section standard G is outlined there in terms of what may happen. Here's the thing you need to know. This section 5, you don't fill out anything, but understand it so you can have that conversation with your buyer or with your seller as to what that may mean. So read it, read standard G.
I'll give you a real life example that just happened 2 weeks ago. The lender had to redisclose the CD to the buyer. In the redisclosing time frame, the hurricane, the last one, got in the grid. So we couldn't have a closing because they couldn't bind insurance. So the buyers couldn't get insurance to put on the CD in the time frame. So we had to wait for the hurricane to get out of the grid, and then it was a domino effect. Okay, so then the lender had to redisclose because of the extension for the hurricane. So then they got an additional 3 days. So you can see how some of these paragraphs may interrelate in the event that you start using one of the paragraphs.
Because now you have to disclose new amounts of prepaids and such. And so it just sets in effect main thing is be aware that this can happen. Read standard G, know this section, be able to, in those moments, calm the nerves and explain this is what's going on. And yes, we are going to close, but we can't just cancel because of this. And hurricane coming into the grid, just understand that once that hurricane comes into the grid within the Gulf, the insurance company says, we're not insuring until we know where this thing hits.
Correct. And the grid doesn't even have to be a hurricane. It could be a named storm. Basically, Gulf of Mexico, west to Texas, north to North Carolina, and then, of course, east into the Atlantic Ocean. So
there you go. All right, so there's your extension of closing date. Well done. We'll come back. We'll deal with occupancy and possession.